what is meant by essentials? In Arabic, the word is rukn. And rukn means a pillar. So every building has a pillar or pillars that it stands on. If you take one of these pillars, the building collapses. And the same thing with the prayer. The prayer is composed of conditions which comes before the actual form of worship. And we had covered this earlier. And it is composed of pillars, arkan, mandatory acts, wajibat, and voluntary acts, sunan. Now, rukn, as scholars say, your prayer is rendered invalid if you drop a pillar. Whether you do that intentionally, or due to ignorance, or due to forgetfulness, your prayer is totally invalid. And what is the reason for its being invalid? The answer is that it is a pillar, and without it, your prayer would not be valid. However, if you forgot it or done it out of forgetfulness and you managed to offer it before you concluded the prayer, and how is that possible? For example, if a person dropped a sajda from the first rak'ah, and then while he was in the beginning of the second rak'ah reciting the Fatiha, he remembered that he only offered one sajda. So he immediately went and offered that sajda he skipped. In this case, we say that the prayer is valid because he actually offered 8 sajdas, 4 rak'ahs in a 4 rak'ah prayer. But if he concluded the prayer and then he remembered, we would say that your prayer is invalid. He says, why? He said, because you offered 7 prostrations, 7 sujood, while you should have offered 8. So your prayer by this definition is invalid. So it is extremely important to know what the pillars of your prayer is and what the mandatory acts are. One would ask, okay, Sheikh, where did you get this? Can you show me from the Quran and the Sunnah that the Prophet said, these are the pillars, these are the mandatory acts, these are the voluntary acts? Well, scholars are scholars because this is their job. It is not practical for you to go to a neurosurgeon who says that you have a problem in your spinal cord and we would like to do the following surgical procedure. You would not ask him, okay, show me in detail where you got this from and the references and the books of medicine. That this is illogical. Nevertheless, there are a number of evidences that help a scholar come to such a conclusion. One of the most famous is the hadith of Al-Musi salatih, the man who did not offer prayer well. The story, as you all know, a man came to the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ while the Prophet was sitting with his companions, offered 2 rak'ahs, and came to the Prophet ﷺ to join his gathering and said, Assalamu alaikum ya Rasulullah. And the Prophet said, Alayhi alaykum assalam, irji' fasalli fa innaka lam tusalli. Go back and pray because you did not pray. So the man went again and he offered the prayer. and came back again and gave salam to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam answered the salam and said, go back again and pray, for you have not prayed. The guy went for the third time and offered 2 rak'ahs, came, offered salam, and the Prophet said the same reply. This was it. The man said, O Prophet of Allah, by Allah, I cannot pray better than what I had done. So teach me. Here, the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam, to him a number of instructions. From these instructions, scholars said that this counts as the pillars of the prayer. He said, when you stand up, you face the Qibla and you say Allahu Akbar, and then you read the Fatiha, then you offer the bowing, the ruku' position, and you stay still in the ruku' position. Then you raise your head from the ruku' position and you still erect until every bone goes back to its place, etc. From this hadith, which is the main evidence, scholars said that this is what highlights the vast majority of pillars of the salat. And they also gathered few evidences from here and there. So what are the pillars of salat? First of all, the first pillar is standing up, as it's stated in the book, standing up, but they've dropped a phrase. So standing up while being able. Because if you're not able, standing up is not a pillar. If a person is paralyzed, if a woman is pregnant and cannot stand, if a person has backache or knee problems that prevents him from standing, all of those can, without any problem, pray sitting down. And this pillar is related to fard. So only the mandatory obligatory prayers that standing up in them is a pillar. Voluntary prayers, you can sit down and pray them or offer them sitting down, but your reward is half the reward when you stand up and pray. The hadith of Imran ibn al-Husayn, may Allah be pleased with him, he said that the Prophet ﷺ said, pray standing up. If you can't, then pray sitting down. If you can't, then pray lying on your side. So this hadith clearly illustrates that the issue of standing up is a pillar during fard prayer, and from other hadiths as well. Pillar number 2. Before we go to pillar number 2, so Sheikh, if I'm unable to pray standing up, I can pray sitting down. The answer is yes. But be careful. Some people can walk, can stand up, but they are unable to bow, make ruku' due to backache, or are unable to perform sujood due to problems in their knees. So they start praying while sitting down. Their prayer is invalid. They must stand up if they're able to stand up, because this is a separate pillar, and pray standing up. When it comes to ruku', they must perform ruku' while standing up. If they have a problem, they may sit down and make ruku' while sitting down. But if not, then they have to make ruku' while standing up. If the problem is in sujood, then they may sit down and offer sujood on the chair. But if their problem is not in sujood, their problem is in sitting between the two sajdas or for the tashahud, the actual bending of the knee is a problem. In this case, they have to stand up, they have offer ruku' while standing up, they have to offer sujood on the ground. But when it comes to sitting, they can sit on the chair or on the ground as if it, as whatever convenient it is. Number 2 is what is known as takbiratul ihram. Takbiratul ihram is saying Allahu Akbar in the beginning of the salat. And the evidence behind that is what the Prophet ﷺ said, the consecration of prayer is to say Allahu Akbar. The inauguration of your prayer is to say Allahu Akbar, and concluding it is saying Assalamu alaikum. It is ended with salam. So this clearly signifies that it's a pillar. Now we have to make a distinction between two things. Between saying Allahu Akbar as a pillar and raising the hands as a sunnah that accompanies it. So everybody worldwide does this, Allahu Akbar, which is good. But the raising of the hands is a sunnah. So if I simply say Allahu Akbar and I start to pray, my prayer is totally valid and accepted. Number 3, reading with vocalization the first surah, Al-Fatiha. Now, I don't know what vocalization is, to tell you the truth, but I presume that you make a sound. And this is not mandatory to make a sound. So the bare minimum is to move your lips and tongue. The hadith, لا يزال لسانك رطبا بذكر الله. When someone asked the Prophet ﷺ for his companionship in paradise, the Prophet told him that you should keep your tongue moist with remembering Allah. And all the scholars emphasize that you must move your lips or your tongue. You cannot recite the Fatiha like with lips sealed. You have to do this. Even if you're doing dhikr after salat, you can't say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar with your lips sealed. You've got to move them like this. This is the bare minimum. Otherwise, your prayer is invalid. So, reciting the Fatiha while moving your tongue and lips with it is a pillar of salat for the imam and the individual who's praying on his own. All 4 rak'ahs of dhuhr, they must offer or recite Fatiha in each single rak'ah, as well as other prayers. If they fail to do so in one of the rak'ahs, their prayer is invalid because they've skipped one of the pillars. What about the follower? If I have an imam and I'm praying behind the imam, this is an issue of dispute. And it is so huge that 2 prominent scholars of Islam opposed one another in it. So Abu Hanifa says a follower does not recite the Quran, period. Never, ever. Whether the prayer is silent, the prayer is loud, the prayer is Maghrib, the prayer is Asr, the follower does not recite the Fatiha. While Al-Imam Al-Bukhari, Muhammad ibn Ismail, the compiler of Sahih al-Bukhari, had a different opinion, and he said that the follower must recite the Fatiha, whether his Imam recited it or not, whether it's a silent prayer or a loud prayer. It is a pillar for the ma'moom, for the follower to recite it. And they've debated a lot among themselves, and the most authentic opinion is the opinion of Imam Malik. And this opinion was adopted by Shaykh al-Islam bin Taymiyyah, may Allah have mercy on his soul, and also Shaykh al-Albani, where they say that during silent rak'ah, it's a pillar upon the follower to recite the Fatiha. So if you're reciting, or if you are praying the last two rak'ahs of Isha behind your Imam, and you do not pray Fatiha, your prayer is invalid. If you forgot it in one of the rak'ahs, this rak'ah is invalid. After salam, you have to stand up. You don't offer salam. You stand up and pray a new rak'ah for skipping the Fatiha in the silent rak'ah. And they say that during loud prayers, when the Imam has already recited the Fatiha loudly, then this is not mandatory upon you as a follower to recite the Fatiha. It is recommended if you wish, but it's not mandatory. Your prayer is totally legit and authentic. What about the different evidences, such as whoever does not recite the Fatiha, then his salat is void? Scholars looked at this hadith and said, yes, this is authentic, but there are other hadiths that support not reciting the Fatiha. So in order to combine between all different hadiths, we try to apply them all. And this is done by saying that the first hadith applies for the Imam and the individual. Whenever they skip Fatiha, their prayer is invalid. And also to the ma'moom, the follower, in silent rak'ahs. But during loud rak'ahs, the hadith of Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him, that the Prophet ﷺ once recited the Quran, I think in Al-Fajr prayer, and after he concluded Fajr, he looked at his companions and he said, why was I feeling that someone was trying to snatch the Quran and fight with me over it? Do you recite the Quran while your Imam is reciting the Quran? Don't do that, except with Al-Fatiha. So the general rule we understand from this, it is prohibited, for example, in Maghrib or in Fajr, when the Imam recites the Fatiha, it is prohibited for you to recite the Fatiha and recite a surah like Qul Huwallahu Ahad. This is totally prohibited because of the prohibition of the Prophet ﷺ. He only allowed you to recite the Fatiha. But in the same hadith, Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him, said in the end, and then the people were forbidden from doing that as well, which is reciting the Fatiha. So this also shows and illustrates that it is not mandatory for a follower in a loud prayer to recite the Fatiha, but it is recommended so that we can gather all these opinions together. Number 4, bowing, that is ruku' in every rak'ah. So this is a consensus of all scholars of Islam, that your prayer is invalid without ruku'. And the actual ruku' is to say Allahu Akbar and have your back flat and straight with a 90 degrees with your rest of the body. In some narrations, the companions said that if we were to put water on the back of the Prophet ﷺ, it would have stood still, because he was not leaning too much down and he was not raising his head too much up. and this is a pillar. Now, number 5 and number 6 of these pillars are standing up after bowing and making sure to stand erect. So, with all due respect, if I'm rising from ruku' and I raise my head, definitely I'm gonna be standing erect. I said, no. See, a lot of the people do this. Sami Allahu liman hamida. So they just raise their heads, but they don't go straight and pause for a while to say the adhkar. Rather, they say, do this and go to sujood. And likewise in sujood, when they are in sujood, they just sit and go back again. This is not permissible because they are dropping a pillar of the salat. So you have to say, Sami Allahu liman hamida, and you stand erect. This is a pillar of salat. Number 7, prostration. So I am in the prostration, in the standing position. I should say Allahu Akbar and go for prostration. And prostration is a pillar mentioned in the Quran, such as ruku' as well, such as standing up as well. All of these are mentioned in the Quran. However, prostration has a certain format, because the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, I've been commanded to prostrate on 7 bones: my forehead, and he pointed to his nose, my hands, my knees, and my feet. So these are what you should perform sujood on. If a person performs sujood, I've seen this, a great number of the youth, they have this OCD that they're not aware of, or might be aware of, but they're neglectful. So while they're praying, they're always doing this throughout the prayer. In ruku', they put one hand on their knees and the rest is doing this. In sujood, they do the same. So they make sujood and the other arm is just scratching their faces or playing with the beards or whatever. This prayer is invalid because that person did not offer proper sujood, which means that he did not offer sujood and his prayer is invalid. Now the Prophet said that I was instructed to prostrate on 7 organs, the forehead, and he pointed to his nose, meaning that the forehead and the nose are one. So if a person puts his forehead and misplaces, does not place his nose on the ground, then his prostration is invalid. And so many times people ask, Sheikh, you wear this on your forehead and your shemagh as well, and wouldn't this be part of how do you say it, a barrier between you and the actual organs of salat? The answer is no. This is light. And the Prophet ﷺ and his companions used to wear turbans. Not only that, in Sahih al-Bukhari, the companion said that it was so hot that whenever we wanted to go for sujood, we used to enter our hands in our sleeves and put it, and also put something to protect our forehead from directly prostrating on the ground to avoid the heat. So if the barrier is like a piece of cloth, something that a carpet, like a abaya, a headscarf of a woman, this is negligible. But if it's the big bulky turbans that our brothers from Sudan wear, and they usually take like 5-10 minutes to wrap it, and it's so big, it's like a car bumper, and you want to prostrate on that, definitely you're prostrating midair, and this is not valid and Allah knows best. So we finished prostration. Usually after the first prostration, we raise our heads and we sit. Well, actually, the 8th and the 9th pillars are lifting one's head after prostration, sitting between the two prostrations. So you have to sit. A lot of the Muslims in masjids, I see them, specifically the Hanafi brothers, those from the subcontinent. They barely do this, Allahu Akbar. They do not sit. It's just touch and go. And this is not accepted. Their prayer by the rukns or arkan or the pillars we're mentioning is invalid for dropping the sitting between the two prostrations. They said, we sit. I said, no. Anyone who sees you would say that he performed 2 sujoods while raising his head, but he did not sit. So you have to be truly and really careful when you do this. The hadith, you then sit comfortably. Number 10, taking a comfortable position on all rukns. The Prophet ﷺ ordered the one who did not pray well, the hadith we mentioned in the beginning, to ensure this in every rukn and to repeat his prayer because it was lacking in his first prayer. This pillar is called al-itmi'nan. Al-itmi'nan, meaning that when I offer my prayer, I have to give some time for each pillar individually instead of moving immediately to the following pillar. So if I'm in ruku', Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, I don't say Sami Allahu liman hamidah and I go to sujood immediately. No, I have to say Sami Allahu liman hamidah, and this is tuma'nina, itmi'nan. This is taking a pause, tranquility in salat. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ told that young man who came and prayed 3 times, go and pray because you did not pray. Scholars say that he did not have this pillar, tuma'nina. He was just jumping up and down. And there was no tranquility. There's no pause after each and every pillar of his prayer. Number 11, the last sitting for the tashahud. For a salat that is 3 rak'ahs or 4 rak'ahs, we have first tashahud and the last tashahud, where we sit. In Fajr, we have only the last tashahud. So, in this prayer, it is a pillar that after you offer the second sajda of the last rak'ah of your prayer, that you sit for tashahud. And sitting is a pillar. Saying the tashahud is a pillar. So the one we're talking about is saying the tashahud. So after you raise your head from the second sajda of the last rak'ah, you must say التحيات لله والصلوات والطيبات السلام على النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته, as per the hadith of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, or السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته, as per the hadith of Umar, may Allah be pleased with them all. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله, one narration, وحده لا شريك له, another narration, وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. This is a pillar in the last sitting. And number 12 is the actual sitting down for it. You cannot say it while standing or while in your prostration, or you must offer it. You must read this tashahud when you are sitting. Number 13, the two salams. As-salam, when to conclude. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Again, similarly to the takbiratul ihram. Looking right and left is a sunnah. It is not a pillar. The pillar is to say as-salam. So if I'm sitting down and I am finishing my salat and I say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, prayer is valid. Not looking right and left does not affect the validity of the prayer. So what's the ruling on just saying assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah once? This is not authentic. The authentic doing of the Prophet ﷺ is all the time, all of his life was to offer two salams, except in funeral prayer. And what is the ruling on saying assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, adding wa barakatuh to the right. It's an issue of dispute among those who authenticated the hadith. Some say it's authentic, some say it's not. Some say it's authentic but it was abrogated by his doings. Some say it's not. So the safest is to stick to assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah both sides. Because when you say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, some would say that's a good thing, it's a sunnah. But others would say, no, you have introduced something that is not part of the sunnah. While if you say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh both sides, all parties would say, yeah, you've done a good thing. No one would say, no, you're wrong in what you have done. Everybody would say, it's fine. So this is what you should stick to. Number 14, doing all the rukns in the right order. So the order again. Do you remember where we previously mentioned the order? Anyone? As if I'm going to listen to you or hear you or see you. It's just a rhetorical question. Do you? It's in wudu. And we said that the pillars of wudu, washing the face, washing the arms till the elbows, wiping over your head, washing your feet, being simultaneous, and the order. So here comes the order again. So if a person was praying Al-Fatiha and then said Allahu Akbar and offered two sujuds and then stood up and said Allahu Akbar and offered a ruku', Sami Allahu liman hamida, and then started to recite the Fatiha again, we say that your prayer is invalid. Why? Because you have missed the order. You have to have it in the sequence that the Prophet had never ever broken, alayhi salatu wasalam. Standing up, ruku', rising your head from the ruku', standing up erect, going for sajda, then sitting between the two sajdas, then doing a second sajda, and standing up for the second rak'ah. This sequence, this order is a pillar, and if you fail to maintain this, your prayer would be rendered invalid. Now,